Is the Smart Buildings Academy podcast with Phil Zito, episode 401. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 401 of the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. In this episode, we are going to be discussing why I firmly believe we are entering a retrofit market, and more importantly, what you can do about it. All right. So before we get started, just want to do a couple kind of admin things real quick. We're going to be at the AHR Expo at booth Bravo Charlie 1824. Once again, that is Bravo Charlie 1824. So I really encourage you to stop by. If anything you've heard on any of our podcasts has been interesting to you, definitely stop by. I'd love to talk with you there. You'll be able to meet our team. You'll be able to see demonstrations of our products and be able to ask us any questions you have related to the stuff we discuss here. Also, everything will be available at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/401. Once again, that is podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/401. And do remember, this is a live podcast, so I encourage you on YouTube, LinkedIn, or on Facebook to go into the chat, ask your questions as we move through the episode. I'll answer them. If it's something that I know we're going to cover, I may say, hey, so-and-so, we're going to cover this. Otherwise, I'll answer it. All right, so the first thing that makes sense is for us to define what a retrofit market is. Like, what makes a retrofit market? And there's no kind of defined definition around, oh, well, if we're 51% retrofit, 49% new construction, then we're in a retrofit market. What I've seen in the past, and we've seen this in 2008, we've seen this in 2011, we've seen this in 2000, when we start to see that the majority of projects that are tendered and being put out onto the street from a market perspective, as well as owner direct work, and we see the majority of them are actually additions or changes to an existing building, that's when we traditionally define something as a retrofit market. Because, and if you all know this, then bear with me for 30 seconds. I'm just going to say some stuff that maybe some folks listening to the episode don't know, but a lot of you may know this. So projects are kind of procured two ways, right? You have a capital plan with capital funds, and those are traditional new construction and major retrofit projects. Those are going to be planned out. They're going to have a owner's rep. They're going to have a GC. They're going to have mechanicals, controls contractors, etc. Then we have our more owner direct retrofit that's being funded either through capital funding or through O&M funding, operational funding. Now, what does a retrofit mean? And we're going to come back to this at the end of the podcast. But essentially, a retrofit is a changing of an existing system to accomplish either the same thing more efficiently or to accomplish new things differently. That new things differently and same thing more efficiently are going to be two things we're really going to focus in on as I start to talk about the industry trends that lead me to see that the market is being driven in this way. So if you don't know, the federal government is one of the largest holders of square footage under management. And they have initiatives that are pretty aggressive. And what we're starting to see around these initiatives are that these initiatives are cascading to other states and metropolitan areas. So we see that the federal government, and I'm going to jump around a little bit here, folks. So I'm just pre-warning you. If it seems like I'm jumping from topic to topic, it's because I'm intertwining a bunch of concepts and we don't have visuals. So it may be a little bit confusing, but I promise I'll make it all make sense. So the federal government has this initiative to have zero scope 1 emissions by 2030 for 30% of buildings by square footage. Okay. So let's talk about that. What the heck does that mean? So what that means is zero scope one emissions. So scope one emissions are direct emissions from the building, whereas scope two are indirect, which is, like power plants, stuff like that generate the power. And scope three is stuff that's indirect but not owned by the customer. This would be things like business travel, employee commutes, waste, products and goods, etc. So if we think about a building and their scope one emissions, right, we're talking about essentially reducing utilities consumption to thus reduce scope one emissions. This could also be in a lot of government facilities have cogen plants, have their own generation capacity. That could also be accounted for here as well. The big thing is, how are they going to do this? They're going to have to do retrofits. And if you actually start to dig into this, you'll see that they are building new buildings with pure electric only appliances. They are retrofitting buildings to be electrified. They're doing a variety of things on the grid side, but then they're also implementing a lot of sequences that are more efficient. They're going and having to report on this data, which requires metering, which requires analytics, which requires reporting tools. All of this is going to come full circle a little bit later in this episode when we talk about the market opportunity for those of you listening. Now, what was fascinating to me as I started to study this White House release about this is that the state of California is going to follow the guidance. We're seeing Colorado, Washington, D.C., New York City, St. Louis, Boston, and they're all committing to developing this building performance standards with a goal of adoption of these standards. So developing them 2023, adoption by 2024, Earth Day 2024. Now, why does that matter? What we're going to see when we get a little bit later in this episode is the Inflation Reduction Act and the changes to the 179 Delta tax code. Really, they hit their stride come 2024. But there's something that you need to be aware of with that right now, you should be taking advantage of that for two reasons. And I'll get to those two reasons a little later in the episode. Now, I want to talk about additionally, so we've got the FedGov, right? Biggest operator of square footage, going to be going and really driving for sustainability, driving for energy efficiency. How do we do that? One of the major ways we do that is building automation. Talk more about that later. Then we have the changes to 179 Delta, which is an existing IRS tax code item in the Inflation Reduction Act. And essentially what happened is they call it the Energy Efficient Commercial Buildings Deduction, 179 Delta, and it's been revised from going now from $1.80 per square foot to potentially $5 per square foot. This is based on a ASHRAE 90.1 2007 model. Now, this is important that you hear that right there. 90.1 2007 model. Until I believe it's Department of Energy. It may be another organization. There's a lot of organizations, so don't quote me on this. But there is an organization that decides which 90.1 standard we use. And right now, 2007 is the latest accepted model for this organization. Once they move to a newer version of 90.1, going and getting this deduction is going to be significantly more labor consuming from an analysis and reporting perspective. So if you're going to be going for this deduction, right now is like the time to do it. Plus, there is a total requirement to get the full deduction for the first half of 2023 of having staff that is 5% of the staff on the project have to be apprentices, which is pretty easy to meet if you're using electricians and mechanics, super easy to meet. And it also has to have prevailing wages for labor for you to get that full deduction. Additionally, that $1.80 per square foot to potentially $5 per square foot, that is a sliding scale from 20% reduction against the 2007 baseline to 50% reduction. So you get 50%, you get $5 per square foot. Additionally, this deduction is able to be passed from nonprofits to for-profit organizations. So what's really cool, we see that FedGov thing happening, right? Where we're seeing their efficiency being driven, and we're seeing that cascading to states and major metropolitan areas. Well, guess what they are? They are nonprofits. And since they are nonprofits, tax deduction really doesn't matter to them. So they can now pass that tax deduction on to, typically it's going to go to the consulting engineer or the general, whoever is basically managing overall this project and managing these calculations. And you may be saying, but Phil, we don't get that money. No, controls contractors probably won't get that tax deduction. But in order to have that tax deduction, these retrofit projects need to be created. And so what does that mean? That means that the controls contractors have to go and execute these retrofits. These guideline 36 implementation, going and doing analytics, going and doing metering, going and doing efficiency studies. These can all be executed by contractors. So this is where you have to pair up with your customers, both on the owner side as well as on the consulting engineer side. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Additionally, as if that wasn't enough to drive us towards retrofitting existing buildings, we also have, and I'm going to talk about this, and then I'm going to talk about SEC reporting. We also have in the private sector more than 40 companies representing 1.2 billion square feet joining the Department of Energy's Better Climate Challenge, where they've committed to reducing portfolio-wide greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% by 2030. How do you do that? Obviously, some of it is green energy and the generation around that. I don't know anything to speak about carbon credits, so I don't know enough to speak about that, so I'm not going to. But you've got to imagine a certain portion of that is going to be energy efficiency retrofits and upgrades. So you've got the private sector, you've got 1.2 billion square feet of potential projects right there. Then, as if that is not enough, the SEC is considering requiring ESG reporting. And that is, to my knowledge, still in flux. It hasn't been adopted yet. It may not get adopted. But if that starts to be required as part of the filing, and that becomes public and people start being held accountable to whatever their carbon reporting and their environmental reporting standards are, and there's multiple different frameworks on that, by the way, folks. So whatever standard they're held to and framework they're held to, they may now have to publicly disclose that. And thus that will become something that is considered by asset purchasers, by investors. You hear about large institutional investors considering ESG. I'm not getting into the politics of this, but it is something that is coming down the pipe most likely. And if it does happen, it's just going to be another kind of rock on that scale of tilting us towards a retrofit market. So we've got all of this going on. So hopefully at this point, you're willing to at least say, maybe there's something to this retrofit market. And you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, I think there's an opportunity here. What do I do? And this is where I want you to focus. I want you to sit here, and whenever you think about addressing a market opportunity, I want you to put yourself in your customer's shoes, and I want you to think, how are they affected? So if all of what I just described comes to fruition, and most of it will because it's already kind of out there in the ether, and some of it might or might not. But if it does, then you need to understand that your customers are going to be expected to measure, right? They're going to be expected to measure a lot of their environmental performance. How do they produce energy? Where do they buy energy from it? What is their energy use intensity? What is their greenhouse gas emissions? What are their 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emission, like all of that stuff. What are their scope 1, 2, and 3s? So once they understand that, how do they measure that though? They measure that through metering. They measure that through reporting tools, through analytics, all of which pretty much every OEM in the market right now has something that they sell offering wise that addresses that. Then they need to report. So they're going to have to, in order to comply, they have to report. For some folks in some municipalities, this may be as simple as just grabbing utility bills, regressing them against design days and occupancy, and then showing a change. For others, it may be more intense. It may be as intense as grid interactive buildings, which I don't see hitting the market anytime soon, but it is something to consider as we continue to move down this path. What we primarily want to focus in on, though, is the need to change. So the need to measure and the need to change are the two areas I would focus in if I was a controls contractor or OEM. The need to measure being those top line control software suites, the analytics, the reporting, the FDDs, et cetera. And the bottom line would be the need to change. This would be, where am I implementing control sequences? Where am I doing like a level 1 ASHRAE audit, which we talked about on Wednesday? So how are we analyzing this? What are we doing? And then once we've figured out what we're doing, like, okay, we've analyzed this building, the energy use intensity, according to other buildings in this vertical market, is substantially higher. Let's go and look for some energy conservation measures and let's implement those. Those energy conservation measures could look like a variety of things. Like I said, we're going to do a future episode on energy conservation measures. Once we understand how our customers are affected, then we can understand who is affected. And you really have 3 coverage areas depending on what kind of salesperson you are and what kind of organization you are. You have C-suite, where you're going to have your chief sustainability officer, your chief operations officer, and your chief financial officer. Those are typically going to be the 3 people you're going to focus on. CSO has the sustainability targets. The COO has the operational requirements to achieve those targets. And the CFO has the financial and fiduciary duty responsible around reporting to, any filings, tax incentives, tax deductions, et cetera. Then we move. So that's, overall strategy at the C level. Then we have kind of organizational purview, which is in the VP level. And that's where we have VPs of finance, VPs of marketing, VPs of operations, and VPs of sustainability typically. Now, finance, operations, and sustainability, you probably already know why we would involve them, but why marketing? Because buildings that are green, that are energy efficient, they are most likely going to use that to market, especially if this is real estate or if this is any public entity. They're going to use that information. So being tied into these people and understanding how they're affected. For the majority of you, though, you're going to be selling at the D level and below. You're going to be focused on the director of energy management. You're going to be focused on the director of sustainability and the director of facility operations. Those 3 people will have different buying requirements, but each one of them is affected by this. The director of energy management may be looking for an analytics suite, may be looking for some form of reporting. The director of sustainability as well is probably looking for some sort of analytics and reporting tool. And then the director of facilities is looking for the more operational side of things. How do we change out our sequences? How do we audit and improve the efficiency of our equipment, et cetera? All righty. So then what do we do to solve this issue? Like, what can we actually do? And I've got 5 buckets of things we can do. And the majority of you have or can easily get the capabilities to address these 5 things. First is, excuse me, is going to be metering. Metering is going to be required in order for us to go and actually kind of implement everything we've been talking about. Because at the end of the day, without metering, we don't know for a fact that the things we're implementing are actually having an effect. So we're going to see a substantial expansion of metering. We've had some people on the podcast recently about wireless metering and different metering solutions. Metering is a big area I believe we will see. Analytics slash reporting. So going and implementing an analytics suite that does continuous commissioning, that helps you do level 1 slash level 2 auditing, that's going to be important. Now, as part of metering or analytics, if it's an existing building, there's quite a bit of retrofit. Retrofit is going to be our third item. This is where we put in new controls. We increase point density. We upgrade our controls so that they have trunks that have data flow capacities able to support these analytic suites with the data at the data speed that is required. And then the fourth and fifth item that I would focus in on would be audits and measurement and verification. Now, when I talk to a lot of controls contractors and they hear the word audit or they hear the word MV, measurement and verification, they're like, oh crap, that's really, really detailed. And it can be, absolutely can be. You can be, for example, an AEEE CEA, certified energy auditor. You can be doing a level 3 ASHRAE audit. You can be doing option D IPMVP. Yes, but you can also do a level 1 audit. You can also not be an auditor and just pull utility bills, look at energy use intensity, look at comparable buildings in Energy Star and their energy use intensity and say, hey, you've got a problem. And oftentimes that's what you need, because of all of this, what I don't want you to do is to blow up your cost of sales. And that's one of the risks whenever we're talking about solution selling, is going and being such a solutioner to our customers that we sink a lot of dollars into developing an opportunity without an opportunity. So what we really need to be doing is we need to understand the pains the customers are facing, be fluent in the issues of the time, which I described earlier in this podcast, and be able to initiate a conversation of, hey, I heard that this is going. For example, I heard this metropolitan area is adopting this guideline or this standard for energy use intensity. How is that affecting your organization? How are you reporting on that data if it is affecting your organization? What's your plan to get yourself in line with guidelines? Just having those basic questions and then be quiet and let them talk. And if they say yes, or we don't have a plan, but we need to, that's where you can step in with, well, hey, let me do a free level 1 audit, give you an idea of what your energy use intensity is and some energy conservation measures I think we could do that would help you get to where you're going. There's no ESCO contract, energy savings contract. There's no level 2, level 3 audit. This is something that's pretty low effort that you can do, and you can have that conversation and get your foot in the door. Then you get a memorandum of understanding or potentially a development contract to develop an opportunity, and then you move forward. The final thing I want to discuss here before I open it up for questions is understand who will be your gateway. Because most of you do not have professional engineers on staff and a professional engineer is required to certify the 179 Delta savings, you're most likely going to be working in partnership with a consulting design engineer, some building consultants, or owners with in-house energy teams. So be aware of this. Don't be blindsided by the fact that your customer is most likely already talking to either a consultant / design engineer or to a building consultant. Try to figure out who that is, pair up with that person, come in with a bundled solution, and that will help a lot of you. And also it'll reduce your cost of sales on the energy development side because those folks will be doing a lot. And if you can team with those people, you could almost in your individual metro areas build kind of a team, like come up with a teaming agreement. Okay, we're going to joint pursue these customers and you agree to team with us. Kind of reminds me like the old P3 projects in Canada, public-private partnerships where you'd have a whole team of people and they would pursue this 30 plus year public-private partnership building and construction project. Well, it'd be similar here. You'd build up that partnership and you would team together and you'd pursue these opportunities. All right, that was a mind dump. That was a lot of information. I wanted to get it to you in less than 30 minutes because that's where we try to keep things. Now I'll open the floor to any questions. Let me go to our traditional social channels and see if there are any questions I can answer for folks right now. I hope this was helpful. I hope you all see the opportunity I see. I'd be very interested if you're already being engaged in these kind of opportunities, what your experience is. And definitely, I'm here to help you. My team's here to help you. We're retooling a lot of our training to focus on this opportunity because I believe it is where the industry is headed. Not even counting the 80% of buildings that have no control system in them whatsoever. That is a gold mine of opportunity that has not even begun to be tapped yet. So if you have any questions, post them in the chat. Let me check. All right. LinkedIn looks good. I don't see any questions there. Let's take a look at YouTube. We're good there. And let's take a look at Facebook. Looks like we're good there as well. Okay, folks. So I'll give it a second here because I know there is a little bit of latency. But if you have any questions, definitely let me know and I will answer those. All right. Everything will be available at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/401. Once again, that is podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/401. All right, folks. Look forward to talking to you. Thanks a ton and have a great rest of your day. Oh, wait. We got one. Oh, Hank, you snuck it in there. All right. Would it be helpful if they locked in with the financing to be able to show the immediate savings so it doesn't have to go through the operating process? Great question. I didn't even bring up utility incentives and financing incentives. Thank you so much for asking that, Hank. You're absolutely right. Yes. There is a much bigger piece to this. Now we're starting to step potentially into the ESCO space. If the financing is conditional on savings, and it's kind of like a pain share, gain share, that's one thing. If this is just, you're a major OEM and you have your own financing, which a lot of them do, and you wanted to do that, that is potentially another way. Another way I've seen is also if you're working with a municipality or a school district, assisting them in developing their campaigns for this. So often this has to be a proposition on the ballot that gets approved or denied. I used to live in a town in Wisconsin that had a much older generation of folks, and they did not like to vote for anything related to schools. So really, at the end of the day, it's about educating people to even vote to approve those expenditures. So there's a lot to that. And I think financing requires a podcast of its own, but that definitely would not hurt. Now, what I would say is the financing is not necessarily going to go and show savings. So are you saying like, hey, go and define the potential ROI on the energy conservation measure? Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying locking in finance so that the customer does not potentially have to produce capital? That would be my one question to you, Hank. Andrew says, what is my thought on the size range of buildings that don't have systems? So supposedly, if there's this 80% number floating around, and I'm going to try to Google it right now. 80% of buildings do not have a building automation system. I wonder where that comes from. Um, I've heard it said so many times that complete transparency, I've been guilty of saying that myself. So I thought it came from a NREL study. I think, but I'm not 100% sure. So I would really have to go and dig into it. It's one of those things I've heard from someone that heard from someone, and I've repeated it. And I've heard so many other people repeating it that's kind of become tribal knowledge. Um, I will tell you though that there's a lot more strip malls and small office buildings than there are towers. And so by quantity, I don't have a hard lift thinking that there's 50% of buildings less than 20,000 square feet that don't have a BAS. I would not be shocked by that. Andrew also says utility incentives are getting a bit thinner around here. They're getting a bit thinner everywhere. Wait until everything's electrified and then see what changes, because that's one of my big fears. This huge push for electrification while we're not really investing in our grid and expanding our grid. How is our grid going to handle that? And one of the ways I see that potentially being handled is utilities providing incentives to potentially reduce demand and consumption, as well as to probably give incentives around time of use and demand response strategies as well. Hank says to be able to just put the financing together to show the savings and make it easier for the company who is getting the product to get it all through the committee. Okay. Yes, I do think that would not hurt, as long as if this was 2 years ago, when dollars were really cheap. Well, I guess 2 years ago, there's no one working. So slash that idea. But yeah, if you could have the interest rates from 2 years ago, that looks very attractive. I still think historically interest rates are relatively low. But yeah, it's not going to hurt to be able to show that depending on the vertical market you're dealing with. Sometimes, Andrew says, sometimes I'm surprised that buildings don't have one. I'm really not. So I hear a lot of folks talking about cyber, about talking about sustainability. And I was on a call the other day, a panel call with an agency. And they said, who should we be training? And I said, you need to train the sales engineers and the specifiers, because those are the folks who are going to educate these building owners of why they even need to pursue a building automation system. Because your average building owner owns maybe a 3-story office building. It's a rental asset for them. It's producing cash flow. Outside of regulatory compliance, not much is going to move them to adopt a building automation system. But regulatory compliance is coming. So it's something we really need to be aware of that's coming down the pipe that, yeah, definitely can impact us. All right. Any other questions from anyone else? Those were great, Hank and Andrew. Thanks so much for asking those. Catherine has a question. How effective are limited scope trials of newer technology solutions to educate decision makers and prove the value prior to major project installation? Great question. So that's something I was part of an analytics. I like to say I was part of selling analytics back when analytics wasn't cool. Was part of an analytics solution group that was kind of train the seller model. So we would train local salespeople to sell, and we would assist them on the initial qualifying and discovery calls. The challenge with those kind of things are, can you get someone to actually commit to going and putting skin in the game? Oftentimes, I see a lot of limited scope trials that are done at cost or done for free. And that doesn't give me the warm fuzzy that someone has skin in the game to, one, actually use it, and two, to actually pursue it once it's used. So How I like to see those worded, if possible, is something to the effect of that you've seen a capital plan, they have the intent, so there's a letter of intent, and the letter of intent is dependent upon the success of a pilot, and you really have to get clear. The pilot is going to do XYZ. These are the metrics. So while even a letter of intent is a little squishy, um, it's still better than a lot of these pilots that are sold with no proof of intent, no proof of budget. Um, so quite honestly, like, decision makers should be on board, in my opinion, even before you get to the pilot phase. So I hope that helps, Catherine. And Andrew, you're welcome as well. Thanks for going and attending pretty much every podcast that we've done. I really appreciate that. It's always good to see your name here in the chat. I'll pause, see if Catherine has any clarifying questions on what I just answered for her. Take a look at that. No. Okay. Well, everybody, thanks so much. I hope this was helpful for you. Like always, after the fact, hit us up, podcast@smartbuildingsacademy.com/401. Let us know if this is something you're challenged with, if you'd like to know more about what you'd like to know more about it. We will definitely go and continue to produce content on this topic. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here. And you all have an awesome rest of your day. Take care.